Bonjour, Remy.
Mr. Adesina, yes, I can hear you.
Remy, bonjour. Frère, comment? Ça va?
Oh, what? Ça va? Well, I very much appreciate a little bit of English. I love my language. So don't you worry about flexing your French.
How you doing?
I'm fine. It's been a while. It's lovely to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. You've been keeping safe and well?
Yes, I have been.
Terrific.
A lot to be grateful for.
Terrific.
Okay, good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Ryu. Good morning, Georgia. If you are ready, we will start with the introduction video and off we go, if it's okay for you.
Hey, wait.
So we start.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us today. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and I am delighted to be your host for today's Finance in Common Spring meeting. We're honored to have such a distinguished group of speakers with us to consider the role of African Pdbs in bringing about a green and resilient future for the continent after a year like no other. After a quarter century of growth, African economies, particularly those of sub-Saharan Africa, face a relatively weak bounce back, 3.3%, compared with the global forecast of 5.5%. Now, that's substantially lower than the trend anticipated before the pandemic. The turbulence caused by COVID-19 will have a profound effect on the continent's economies, with the most vulnerable already being hit hardest. About 39 million people in the region could fall into poverty this year. But an inclusive and sustainable recovery that offers opportunities to the continent's young and dynamic population is still within Africa's grasp. And public development banks can play an important part in steering towards sustainable recovery measures that could make all the difference in the long term. So we're here to look at the how and the why of that responsibility. So it's my honor to invite Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, to take the floor to kick off today's conversations. Mr. Adesina.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone. I wish to start by thanking my dear friend Remy Rio, the CEO of the Agence Française de Développement, for co-organizing this event with me and the African Development Bank. I'd like to thank you, Remy, in particular, for your personal leadership on the Financing in Common agenda, a remarkable effort launched to bring together public development banks providing $2.3 trillion in annual lending globally. Accounting for an estimated 8% of total investments globally, public development banks have a major role to play in accelerating development and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Our gathering today is coming just ahead of the conference in Paris, convened by President Emmanuel Macron to discuss financing for Africa. The African Development Bank is strongly supportive of public development banks. The African Development Bank's vision of this can be seen with the leadership role we played in establishing the Association of African Development Finance Institutions, the Afri-Exim Bank, the Trade and Development Bank, the West African Development Bank, the East African Development Bank, and several national and regional development banks all across the continent. Together, within the framework of financing in common, let us move forward boldly and strengthen institutional capacities and governance and financial capacity of public development banks. As public development banks, we must deepen our ability to reach all parts of Africa. To ensure financial inclusion, especially for the unbanked, and expand access to finance, savings, and insurance products and services, we need to work as one unified system. A system that is able to source capital in the most efficient ways, taking advantage of the global and regional capital markets. A system that deepens domestic capital markets and strengthens stock exchanges, expanding listings for small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. A system that is able to efficiently allocate capital to unlock enormous opportunities in Africa, especially in food and agribusiness, natural resources, tourism, and industrial manufacturing. A system that is able to accelerate access to financing to unlock new economic opportunities for the youth, to grow youth-led businesses, and position Africa to take full advantage of its demographic dividend. A system that is able to work efficiently together to finance regional infrastructure at scale, including energy, ports, airports, roads and highways, rail and ICT infrastructure, to accelerate Africa's regional integration and competitiveness, and assure success of the African continental free trade area. Dear colleagues, such a system calls for pooling capital, greater use of syndications, co-financing, and increased use of risk instruments, such as guarantees to de-risk investments. Such a system also calls for collective ability to work as a unified system that is able to attract significant foreign direct investments to Africa and boost manufacturing capacity and industrialization of the continent. The COVID-19 pandemic has had massive impacts on Africa. Over 30 million people fell into extreme poverty in 2020, and it is estimated that another 39 million people will have fallen into extreme poverty by the end of 2021. Over 30 million jobs have been lost. The private sector, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, have suffered particularly from lack of access to finance, and many of them face major risk of rebooting financing for their businesses. The debt levels have soared on the continent, with debt to GDP rising from 60% prior to the pandemic to 70 to 75% now. The continent faces huge fiscal deficits. The IMF estimates that the financing needs for sub-Saharan African countries could be $425 billion for 2021 to 2025. The African Development Bank moved quickly and launched a $10 billion crisis response facility to support countries to meet new fiscal challenges. The African Development Bank also launched a $3 billion Fight COVID-19 social bond on the global capital markets, the largest ever US dollar-denominated social bond in world history, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and the NASDAQ. We project that African economies will recover gradually from the pandemic, with GDP growth expected to be 3.4% in 2021. Now that recovery is expected to be across the board for oil exporting countries, tourism-dependent economies, commodity-dependent economies, and for non-resource dependent economies. But dear colleagues, all these depend on access to vaccines and tackling the issue of Africa's debt. tackle the issue of vaccines, the African Development Bank is supporting the Africa Center for Disease Control with $28 million to strengthen its capacity. The bank plans to launch a major effort to build Africa's pharmaceutical industry, to which we plan to invest $3 billion in the next 10 years. The bank is also currently working with partners on how to best support the financing of manufacturing of vaccines on the continent. Now, tackling the issue of debt must be our top priority. This is critical for overall financial market stability on the continent in the short and medium term. Without a resolution of Africa's $700 billion external debt, Africa's economic recovery will be like running up a steep hill with a backpack full of sand. Of particular concern is the $377 billion debt owed to private creditors and commercial banks. Total Eurobond debt alone was $169 billion at the end of 2019. Now, think of the impact that this debt is already having. In 2019, Africa paid $221 billion for debt service, which is 44% of the total government revenues of $501 billion in the same year. A number of efforts have been made to deal with the debt challenge, including the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, otherwise known as DSSI, and the G20 Common Framework on Debt Treatment for Public and Private Debt. The DSSI, which has been extended to the end of this year, has only provided $4.5 billion, and that's only 3% or so of Africa's outstanding bilateral debt. Even then, the DSSI does not deal with reducing the quantum of debt of Africa, but only postpones debt service payments. Without doubt, the cost of debt service will continue to rise. The can is kicked down the road, but the reality will catch up soon when it's time to pay. The G20 Common Framework to deal with the public and private debt treatment has only seen 3 African countries, Chad, Zambia, and Ethiopia, participate. However, rating agencies have been quick to look unfavorably on this, and Ethiopia was downgraded by Fitch Ratings. The issuance of SDRs by the IMF offers a new ray of hope, if well used, to support the recovery process in Africa and also to address Africa's debt challenge. On this, dear colleagues, we should pursue 2 interlinked common approaches. First, the African Development Bank urges that a part of the SDRs be used to support public development banks, to have additional resources to support countries to build back better, greener, and with climate and environmental resilience, while creating green jobs for the youth. To further show our strong commitment to the Paris Agreement and climate change, the African Development Bank and the Global Center for Adaptation have launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program to help to mobilize $25 billion for climate adaptation and resilience for Africa. As Africa's premier financial institution, with a AAA rating and a prescribed holder of the SDRs, the African Development Bank has the strong backing of all the public development banks to support them through the use of SDRs to help drive the achievement of the Paris Agreement and climate change actions on the continent. Their colleagues, second, a share of these SDRs should be used to pay down some of Africa's huge private commercial debt while bringing them into the G20 Common Framework. It is clear that if this is not done, when the debt payments become due from 2023, 2024, with bunching of payments, many countries will not be able to meet their obligations, which could trigger massive and widespread credit downgrades across Africa. It is time to take this action now to forestall what would be a payment crisis just down the road. As Africa's premier source of long-term capital, the African Development Bank, with its 100% exposure in Africa, could be severely affected. And so also with all the public development banks whose lending are mainly to governments. Such a situation must be avoided. A stitch in time, they say, saves 9. I therefore would like to call for the strong collective support of Africa's public development banks for these 2 strategic actions to assure financial stability of the continent and accelerate a post-COVID-19 economic recovery that is inclusive, green, and climate resilient. The African Development Bank will also be keen to work with you all, particularly on 2 initiatives, which we have launched to also drive inclusive growth on the continent. The first is the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, otherwise known as AFAWA, an initiative to mobilize $5 billion in new financing in support of women businesses in Africa. As of today, we are working with 24 financial institutions in 15 countries, and we expect to expand that rapidly by 2022. Second, to tackle the huge challenge of youth unemployment on the continent, and to support and unleash the creativity and businesses of young people, the African Development Bank will soon be launching Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. These banks will be well-capitalized new financial institutions to create a new financial ecosystem to support and grow the businesses of the youth of Africa at scale. The African Development Bank will continue to play its leadership role to ensure the success of all public development banks. The success of all is the success of Africa. The outcomes of our meeting today are important for the May 18 conference in Paris, where I will be presenting our collective position as public development banks. I look forward to fruitful engagements and discussions. Together, we are stronger. Together, we deliver better. Together, we will be like a baobab tree whose roots will be deep enough to touch all parts of Africa and lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Thank you very much and welcome once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adesina. Some really inspiring words there and some pretty exciting announcements from the AFDB. So a great way to start off today's conversations. I'd now like to hand over to Mr. Rémi Rioux, the President of the International Development Finance Club and CEO of the Agence Française de Développement. Mr. Rioux.
Bonjour à tous. Let me start by thanking all of you for being here with us and for your support to the Finance in Common journey. Remember, the 450 public development banks of the world, 10% of total investments globally, gathered for the first time ever at the first FIX Summit in Paris in November 2020. It came as a surprise and ignited a vast movement towards sustainable finance through renewed international cooperation. It raised high expectations from all willing partners around the world. On this occasion, the crucial role of Pdbs in reconciling counter-cyclical responses with sustainable long-term investments has been acknowledged by the international community, including UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And we, Pdbs, decided to send a very strong signal by committing in an ambitious joint declaration to gather forces and form a global coalition. Since then, the momentum has only been growing. Prime Minister Mario Draghi announced end of April at the Leaders Summit for Climate Action that Italy will organize next fall the second edition of the Finance in Common Summit as part of this year's G20 agenda. And a growing number of stakeholders, international organizations, central banks, the private sector, civil society, academics, is now joining our initiative, willing to work more closely with Pdbs in this crisis and to build a more coherent and coordinated financial system for the future. Altogether, we now form a global movement to finance in common. As we Pdbs are striving to shift the center of gravity of the financial system towards sustainability and concreteness, I would like to pay a very special tribute to the African Development Bank. Thank you so much, dear Dr. Adesina, for your unfailing support. You were, last November, the main partner of the 2020 FIX Summit, and you organized today this event along with the World Federation of DFIs, chaired by the African Association of DFIs, the AADFI, dear Thabo Prince Tamane, and the International Development Finance Club, the IDFC, that I have the honor to chair since 2017, with its 4 proud African members present today. The BOAD of YMU, dear Serge Ekwe, the CDG, Caisse des Dépôts et Gestion of Morocco, dear Abdelatif Zahnoun, the DBSA of South Africa, dear Patrick Dlamini, the TDB from COMESA, dear Admasu Tadesse, and thanks to other colleagues from all over the world, including from my own region, Europe, for their participation today. Indeed, Finance in Common is a global movement, but Africa is at its strategic core. Our joint declaration pays very special attention to the region, in particular in the context of COVID-19, which poses a threat on the continent's hard-fought gains in the past 2 decades, and to which the African Pdbs can forcefully respond. This is the reason why we decided to dedicate this FIX spring meeting to Africa, because Africa is a global priority, because African challenges, more than anywhere else, require us to go seek coordinated responses and actions, because in Africa, we can innovate and we need to leave no one behind. So let's finance in common and build now a common and positive story of innovation and investment in Africa, leveraging ODA and mobilizing all willing stakeholders. The days of pure aid are over. Africa is ready for sustainable investment. I close by saying that our event today, yes, takes place in the sidelines of an important summit on financing African economies to be held in Paris next week, hosted by President Macron. It will gather many African leaders and institutions, as well as their key international partners, to devise jointly actions and a financial package that will preserve the financial stability and help boost a strong and inclusive recovery in Africa, grounded in a dynamic private sector and accelerating the green and digital transition of the continent in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. This summit next week is a unique opportunity to hear loud and clear the voice of all African public development banks to better understand their role in the financial architecture and to strengthen them. They're all participating today around and under the leadership of the African Development Bank with the AADFI. And President Adesina will, of course, participate next week's summit. Be sure that we will very carefully listen to the messages and the innovative proposals coming out of today's discussion. Merci à tous, and let's grow this baobab tree together. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Mr. Ryu. Some really exciting imagery there with the baobab tree. It has really taken root clearly. And it was really interesting and important how you set out what a big role Africa plays, how important it is to put it at the heart of the conversation as efforts are made to shift that center of gravity of financial systems towards equity and sustainability. So we will be examining it from a number of viewpoints today. So we have 3 sessions scheduled. But before we crack on, we will be taking a quick 5-minute break. A little reminder for those of you who may want to follow the conversation in French. There are translation options in the Zoom platform. So if you look for the icon of a little globe, there's an option of French or English. We will be rejoining in about 5 minutes for our first session. We'll be looking at how African PDBs and international partners can help redirect financial flows to support the SDGs, the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So go get a glass of water, stretch your legs, and I'll meet you back here in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much to Mr. Ryu and Mr. Adesina for kicking us off. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for staying with us. So we're going to kick off with our first session of the day. 2020 hit African economies hard. The recession of 2.1% is the region's largest contraction in more than half a century. And within this context, the role of the African Public Development Bank and their international partners is more crucial than ever in making sure that the immediate response to the crises caused by the pandemic keeps an eye on the horizon. As far as possible, measures should be sustainable and take into account goals established pre-COVID, aimed at establishing in the long term a greener, growing, and more equitable Africa. The continent needs to turn the COVID-19 emergency into opportunity. And to look at the challenges and how to do so, with me today are Ms. Ambroise Fayol, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Mr. Fayol, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mr. Koen Doens, the Director General of International Partnerships for the European Commission. Mr. Doens, it's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Mr. Patrick Dlamini, CEO of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Mr. Dlamini, lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Georgia.
Dr. Kevin Kariuki, the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth at the African Development Bank. Mr. Kariuki, Dr. Kariuki, we're looking forward to hearing from you today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Rachel Turner, the Director of International Finance at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Rachel, we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, and great to be here, colleagues.
So I'm going to start off by asking all of the panelists for their take on how they see the role of public development banks in Africa and what can they do to better help economies transition towards inclusive, resilient and sustainable development. Mr. Fayol, I'll start off with you. What's your take on this?
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And let me first thank both AFD, Remy, and AFDP, President Adesina, for the invitation. This is a great initiative, and I very much welcome that we are able to have this event today. Thanks a lot for this. And the Financing Common is I think one of the new initiatives that really is a very, very promising one. And it is a promising one because indeed public development banks have a special role. And actually, for me, the special role that has been clear in the recent months, unfortunately due to the pandemic, is to reconcile the short-term counter-cyclical measures that they have to do with the sustainable recovery. That means also long-term impact measures to help with the long-term challenges that we all face. And that is unique for public development banks to be able to connect the dots between countries, between clients, between international partners and priorities, and to do that in a way that will allow make progress on very important objectives of the international community, such as the climate, for example, and also build partnerships. And what we have seen in recent months is that partnerships are key to have an impact and to be successful. So I think the idea of Pdbs is basically stronger we are if we are together. And I'll stop there. But for us, Team Europe is a great initiative in order to boost this idea of having stronger partnerships towards being more effective, in particular in Africa. And I'm sure that Koen will also elaborate on this. And let me just finish by saying I was very pleased to hear the word baobab, because baobab is not only a well-known tree, it's also a great project, that microfinance project that we have financed in West Africa with other partners. Again, partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fayol. And as Mr. Fayol mentioned, Mr. Doens, you're perfectly positioned to give your take on the importance of partnerships in the boosting of the role of public development banks. So what's your take on their role and what they can do to better help economies transition towards a greener and more resilient development?
Well, thanks a lot, and let me start also by thanking Dr. Adesina and Remy Riou for having me today. Really a pleasure to be on this panel. I think, I mean, it's an obvious one why public development banks are crucial. Remy has just said, I mean, they account for 10% of global public spending. And I think it's very, very clear that without them, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to overcome seriously the challenge of recovery that we're all facing in a sustainable way. That's also why the financing common approach is so fundamental. I think without the fix, we can't fix it. Now, so I see them as a real crucial players in this whole mobilization of fiscal and monetary tools that we're putting at work to boost recovery globally. And that is certainly the case for Africa. And I think that some of the things that will be on the agenda next week at the summit that President Macron is organizing on financing African economies show more specifically how big the role of Africa's public development banks is, and the role subsequently that other partners development banks can play to actually boost that. Now, my second point is that, of course, funding streams, financial streams are never neutral. And a real big question, therefore, is as this funding comes on stream, what kind of recovery does it finance? And here, I mean, in Europe, we've been very, very strong through the whole Green Deal approach on making sure that those streams support a recovery and a reorientation of our economy towards being green, low carbon, human-centric digitalization, and inclusive. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for what African development banks will be doing over the next couple of years, starting now, to indeed also kickstart that major boost for a sustainable recovery, for which the potential across the African continent is absolutely huge. And we will be looking, but I'm sure that we'll have the occasion of going a bit more into detail in the rest of the panel. We'll definitely be keen to partner with our African partners and with the African development banks to make sure that that indeed can happen at a level and a size that is really needed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Jones. Mr. Damini, I mean, you're perfectly positioned to speak more about the specifics of what public development banks can do within Africa in terms of driving sustainable development. What's your experience been on this front?
Thank you, Georgia. We have a very critical role as the development finance institutions. We are part of, or we are very much a central part of the financial ecosystem. We have a role in driving alignment with the Paris Agreement, as well as alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals as the public development banks. We have a very critical role to partner with each other to ensure that our economies and the risk capital, we are able to deploy to prepare projects so that they become investable, so that at least we can make sure that our economy is inclusive, which then talks to how do we bring the youth, as President Adesina spoke about it, as well as how do we make sure that as the public development banks, we ensure that our economies on the continent is able to start looking at the inclusion of biodiversity, which is nature, as well as people. We also know that on the continent, many of our economies are driven by tourism, which is largely biodiversity driven. And how then do we start making sure that we start engaging our governments, start engaging our partners across the continent to ensure that the just transition becomes a reality, in the sense that just transition can only be just if it's inclusive, if it is equitable. So it's very, very, very important as we are driving towards the end of the Sustainable Development Goal times, that we make sure that our respective countries on the continent are not left behind, and that we are able to ensure that the youth businesses are promoted and well supported, women businesses are promoted and well supported, and that biodiversity is not left out. As the development finance institutions, actually, I have the pleasure of having been a member of the advisory council for the CPI or together with the European Climate Foundation, as well as the Oxford University, where we were looking at coming up with a framework for sustainable finance integrity. This sets the minimum and leadership benchmarks so that we can begin to start measuring the progress that the financial ecosystem is making in ensuring that we drive towards a sustainable future. Because the future of low carbon is the future that we all want. The future where nature thrives and human thrives is the future that we want. Therefore, as a public development banks, we have a role that we make sure that our Paris agreements are fully aligned with, as well as sustainable development goals. Because when we do that, then we are going to be able to ensure that the transition to the low carbon future is a just transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. Dr. Kariuki, we heard Mr. Dlamini there speaking about how a low carbon future is the future that we all want, and how Pdbs can help drive considerations of biodiversity in terms of making projects more investable. You yourself are the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth. How does this inform what you want to see from Pdbs in terms of their operations in a post-COVID world?
Thank you very much, Georgia. First of all, I think the first point I would like to make is that the African Development Bank's mandate to advance inclusive, resilient, and sustainable pathway emanates from and is enshrined in the bank's 10-year strategy, whose overarching objectives are to achieve growth that is more inclusive and transition to green growth. Therefore, advancing Africa's inclusive, resilient, and sustainable pathway is simply core to our shared existence. So in this regard, what I would want to say is that from the perspective of the bank, I would like to observe that as a financial institution, that the bank's leading role should be to help regional member countries comply with the relevant environmental and social safeguards and achieve NDC goals while unlocking the challenge of energy access in Africa, which are integral to this pathway. The evidence of this is from the bank, for example, is that the African Development Bank is playing and charting this pathway and is underpinned by the bank's fourfold increase in the share of climate change related investments from 9% in 2016 to 36% in 2019. And but for repurposing due to COVID-19, we would have achieved the 40% target that we had set in 2020. It is therefore, it's also important to note that about 80% of the bank's climate finance resources came from internal resources. And I think here what is important is to mention what was referred to previously, is that the bank increased in renewable energy generation investment from 9% in 2001 to 2010, and it increased to 70% during 2011 to 2019. And since 2016, this has increased to 80%, leading to an additional 2,000 megawatts of new renewable generation since 2016. I think this is important because it correlates with the 77% increase in Africa's installed renewable generation between 2010 and 2019, proving that the bank's role in the transition that was mentioned by Patrick is actually real. And here I would want to note that there are some very significant examples of transformative projects that the bank has been involved in, including the large-scale solar deployments in Morocco, the 800 and middle and 510 megawatt Kwazizate solar PV plants, and also the 310 megawatt Lake Turkana wind project, which is Sub-Sahara's largest wind project. Now, the other thing that here we need to note is that under the Paris Agreement, developed countries have pledged to contribute 100 billion per year up to 2020 for mitigation. So in order to reduce the deficit, because a lot of that has not come through, to reduce the deficit, the African Development Bank has invested 6.5 billion as adaptation financing to 2015 and committed a further 12.25 billion of adaptation between 2020 and 2025. The latter is part of the 25 billion climate finance that the bank has pledged during this period. This will be supplemented by another 12.5 billion by 2025 that we intend to mobilize through the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, which my president mentioned about, and which is being undertaken together with the Global Center for Adaptation. In total, therefore, the bank has therefore pledged to mobilize about 25 billion between 2020 and 2025 to bridge the gap in adaptation finance. This in recognition that adaptation is core to Africa's climate resilient growth. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Karaoke. And Rachel Turner, what's your take on the role of public development banks in Africa and how they can help boost economies' transition towards kind of greener development?
Thank you, Georgia. And let me also echo others' congratulations to President Adesina and to Remy for hosting this spring meeting of the FIC. I mean, we really do think the FIC, the Financing in Common, is a very exciting innovation in the public development finance space, and very much look forward to working closely with the FIC as we move through the year. So I think others have really tackled this core question about the role of the African Pdbs, and I think I would particularly highlight the phrase building confidence and demonstrating their commitment to inclusion. I think the fact that the African Pdbs are continuing to invest with confidence is incredibly important signal to the wider investment community during this really difficult times as we deal with the pandemic. And I also think seeing the role of the African Pdbs in supporting some of the larger critical systemic firms in Africa and ensuring that Africa emerges from the crisis with those key firms supported is absolutely key. And I also think that we see the African Pdbs with that nuanced understanding of inclusion and the nuanced understanding of spatial inequalities within country boundaries, actually. And I think following the Pdb portfolios really helps send signals to the global development finance institutions as well about where to invest. On the green investment side, a couple of points. I mean, I think you know that we are president of the COP this year, and we're determined to come to the COP with the strongest possible support for countries to deliver their NDCs and their adaptation plans. And I do see lots of opportunities for partnership with the African Pdbs in that space, but I would highlight three specific things. I think one is just the imperative that we work together to mobilize financing quickly and flexibly behind strong NDCs and strong adaptation plans. I think we owe it to countries to be moving fast to get right behind those mitigation plans as they come to the table and demonstrating our confidence in them and working together to do that. I think the other is about building a market in adaptation and resilience investing. And the FIC last year, at the end of last year, launched a new collaborative with the development finance institutions to invest in adaptation and resilience. And we've worked very closely, led by our own DFI CDC since the FIC last year, to really try and mobilize energy and attention behind creating markets in adaptation and resilience investing, not just in mitigation. And I see huge opportunities for partnership with the African public development banks there. And I guess just finally is the green bond piece. And I think it's connected to my first point on NDC financing. But it seems to me there are great opportunities to partnership with the African public development banks to build a market in green bonds to help African countries meet the standards of green bonds and tap into that really critical source of capital and finance. Thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Well, Rachel, I'm not going to let you go just yet. Coming off the back of just some of the points that you were just making, how does this all come together in terms of collaboration between African Pdbs and international banks, delivering specifically on the objectives of the Paris Agreement agenda? What do you think needs to happen with that specific goal in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I very much see it as about everybody aligning behind the new strategies, behind the NDCs and the adaptation plans, working collaboratively together and making clear commitments to work together behind them. So there's something about very strong collaboration. I also think, you know, right now in the current environment, I think we need to acknowledge just how difficult it is for some of the international organizations to be on the ground and to be originating new deals and investments. And I think if, you know, I think partnerships that recognize the origination capability in the green finance space from the Pdbs also have a really important role right now, Georgia.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Mr. Patrick Domini, I'm going to come to you next. So considering how the COVID-19 crisis continues to kind of overshadow so much that's happening on the continent, how specifically do you think that African Pdbs can help transform Africa's economies?
Thank you, Georgia. I think it's going to be absolutely critical. As I said, that the public development banks have a very critical role to play especially when it comes to a role on with the counter-cyclical role that we have to play as DFIs in our respective countries and on the continent as a whole. We also have quite a number of public development banks on the continent that are now accredited entities by the Green Climate Fund, the GCF. We have a role to make sure that Africa is not left behind in terms of ensuring that we are able to access the funding from the Green Climate Fund, as well as the raising of green bonds with our international partners. I mean, a case in point is the relationship that we have with my friend here, Mr. Remiro, who also happens to be our president in terms of the International Development Finance Club, that we also trying to see how can we make sure that there is access to cost-effective funding, because the cost of funding is also quite a serious, critical role. So really the issuing of green bonds, the issuing of SDG bonds and social impact bonds is extremely, extremely important. And even the biodiversity-related bonds, it's gonna be quite critical. And the public development finance institutions have a role in driving these instruments and access to this cheaper and smart funding. But on top of it, and more specifically, I think given the advent of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the public development banks of the continent, together with the international partners, have a much more important role, more than ever before, to help drive the recovery of our economies on the continent. Because we were completely decimated as economies on the continent by the COVID-19. But now, we now need to start saying, how do we make sure that the recovery of our economy is driven in tandem with also the sustainable financing system? Because as we said, climate financing or sustainable development and also the recovery of our economies, we really can be able to do them at scale and be able to achieve a much more higher impact as countries. But again, what it says is how do we make sure that the infrastructure network that supports the African Continental Free Trade Area is built to the standards that actually enables the inter-regional trade for the continent. And also primarily—
Mr. Lumini, I'm just going to jump in. I'm just going to jump in there and invite Mr. Kariuki to amplify maybe some of the points that you've just raised. Mr. Kariuki, I mean, I think that Mr. Domini is very kind of neatly set out the kind of scope of what's at stake here. What's your take on the role that African PDBs can help to transform the continent's economy with the impact of COVID-19 looming large?
I think just to set the context, to date, Africa has lost more than 30 million jobs, and a similar number of Africans has lost access to electricity as they could not afford it any longer. So there is a strong need to be able to rebound and rebound very, very quickly. So PDBs must use the instruments that they have at their disposal and the relationship they hold with the private sector and actors, private sector actors and governments in their respective regional and non-regional member countries to be able to accelerate this particular recovery. On its part, I think I need to mention some of what we have done as a bank. The impact to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on the African economies and lives. The African Development Bank seamlessly established a 10 billion COVID-19 response facility to provide flexible and emergency assistance to the bank member countries to shore up the national budget, economies, and the livelihood of citizens. Also, cognizant that close to 60% of healthcare facilities in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to electricity, the bank launched a facility to accelerate the electrification of health facilities and support energy access solutions. Also, the bank also established a blended finance facility with GCF co-financing, focused on financial assistance to net energy access businesses in distributed renewable energy space, basically keeping the lights on to protect jobs as well as support electrification of healthcare facilities. With regard to the issue of social and green bonds, we walk the talk. We issued a $3 billion denominated Fight COVID-19 social bond, which was not only oversubscribed, but was also the largest US dollar denominated social bond at the time of issuance. It is noteworthy that the COVID-19 social bond builds on successful AFDB, the bank's green bond program, which facilitates the achievement of the bank's corporate priority of green growth. Finally, and very quickly, in July 2020, the African Development Bank also invested in a 2 billion rand Sustainable Development Goals linked bond issued by Nedbank of South Africa. This investment is expected to accelerate the recovery of the economy after the slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in addition to catalyzing an additional almost 4 billion rand of renewable energy investments, which will help South Africa's effort to transit away from coal-generated power over the next 10 years. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Kariuki, setting out there how the AFDBs are walking the talk. I'm going to come next to you, Mr. Koendoens. What role do you see Europe playing in supporting African PDBs in reorienting financial flows towards sustainability?
Well, we hope a real strong role as a key partner for the PDBs, and I think the potential for that is really there. I think, and we've been working, of course, very closely with a large number of African public development banks. So I think that the potential is well known on both sides. It's clear that the combination of, let's say, the existing firepower of the African PDBs with their presence on the ground, with their enormous expertise, I mean, is something we are extremely keen to partner with. We will bring to that relationship, obviously, also a large set of expertise when it comes to, let's say, funding certain transitions to a modern, sustainable green economy. But we obviously also bring finances to the table. Level of the European Commission, I mean, one of the things we manage under our new financial instrument called Global Europe. will be an EFSD, the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, the successor to the current EFSD, which will have really significantly increased firepower when it comes to blending and when it comes to guarantees. We're obviously very keen to use that in support of what African public development banks want to do. We will do that together with our European partners as well, both the European public development banks. I mean, EIB, Ambroise Fayol is here, AFD, Rémi Rioux is here, KfW, ICID, Cassa Depositi Prestiti, FMO, and so on. So the whole group of European public development banks and development finance institutions, which are now grouped together in what we call Team Europe, so that we can bring a joint offer, a much stronger and consolidated offer to work with our African partners. So I think that from an expertise point of view and from a financial support point of view, let's say we have a boulevard ahead of us of things we want to do. And I think that the agenda we will want to pursue, both when it comes to public funding, leveraging public investments, and when it comes to private sector development and leveraging private sector, that there's a lot of things that we see ahead of us. There's a lot we are already doing, but there's a lot more that can be done, and we are definitely in shape to do so and willing to do so. And I think that at next week's summit, our presidents will be able to show a gist of some of the thinking and some of the work that we have been doing.
Thank you so much, Koen. Ambroise Fayol, you were name checked there by Mr. Dunes. What's your take on this? He set out that there is more to be done in terms of collaboration between kind of European partners and African PDBs. How do you see that relationship shoring up the sustainability of efforts of African PDBs?
Well, for us, the African PDBs are really quite important partners. And actually last year, we have done a record level of financing in Africa, and especially in low-income countries in Africa, in the most fragile countries, and including actually for supporting private sector for half of what we have done. And the thing we have developed is a lot of support to financial institutions, especially public ones, in Africa. We do that because partnership is in our DNA. We never finance more than 50% of a project, so we need partners. And for example, what we have done is supporting. Actually, I see that President Tadesse is on another panel. So we have supported TDB. We have supported Afrexim Bank. We have supported DBSA. I'm glad to see Patrick there. So a lot of projects, and of course, leveraging also with our support and partnership with the African Development Bank on specific projects or specific issues like climate, and of course with the African Development Bank and other partners. What I would say is what it brings to me is something that is a combination of leverage and technical support. And on some of the projects that we have financed, it is very important. And for example, let me just give you two examples in different areas. We have supported with President Adesina a project that is called Boost Africa to support venture capital in Africa. And this project is very interesting in what it brings the technical support that is needed for those young entrepreneurs starting their startups, and to be sure that they would have the appropriate answers on their questions, including from questions that they would be answered by startups that have already been in this phase. That is something that is extremely interesting as a project. And another project that we have financed is climate-specific projects, lending to, for example, TDB, where we have supported smaller size projects for renewable energy, wind or solar, that could be also in local currency. And local currency is often something that is missing in not only in foreign currency, but also in local currency. This is the kind of things that that we try to develop at the European Investment Bank. Let me finish by just mentioning one point that I think is very important that was mentioned by Rachel and also by Patrick. Green bonds. I mean, it is not normal that green bonds are issued almost entirely in Europe, in the US, in Asia, etc., and not in Africa. I am pretty sure that, I mean, the potential, we all know that, that Africa is the country that suffers the most from climate change, even if it is the least to contribute to climate change. So we know, and we need, and the support from public institutions, from the public development banks can be here to have here also a combination of trying to there is a strong appetite for green bonds in the world. There would be a strong appetite for green bonds issued by financial institutions in Africa. And we want to support that, but also to combine that with having the best standards to make sure that indeed those bonds would be for green projects that have the standards that are recognized in the world as green projects. And the combination of this will certainly help also in achieving the climate goals that is for, you know, EIB is the EU Climate Bank. This is something that is our key objective for the next years, and that is actually the key objective for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fayol. He actually mentioned the importance of local currency. So I'm going to come to you, Mr. Patrick Lamini. Last September, you signed a memorandum of understanding with the Currency Exchange Fund, TCX. The aim there was to support the development of local markets and protect Eastern and Southern African borrowers from currency risk. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Georgia. Actually, we are the founders of the TCX as well, together with our European partners. We used to hold 10% actually in TCX, but TCX was born out of the need for risk and local currency promotion, as well as risk hedging, especially in emerging markets. TCX got very successful in Asia in terms of the take-up, but on the continent, it really had a very slow start. So what we're trying to achieve by this MOU with TCX is to see how best we can be able to promote the TCX and risk hedging, especially when it comes to currency, because they tend to be always mismatched in the funding as well as the revenue generation. So many countries and many project sponsors will borrow in hard currency, US dollars, euros, for instance, but only to find that their projects are in local currency. So you have a massive currency risk in that mismatch. And in times of crisis, it just gets out of control. But what you then tend to find, people tend to be quite sensitive in taking up these offerings of hedging risk and hedging currency risk. And they tend to think that they would rather take the risk. But when it gets to times like this, when it is too late, it then annihilates the projects completely. But it is something that we are hoping that we will be able to promote the taking up of currency hedging instruments to make sure, and insurance, to make sure that commercial risk and market risk and currency risks are hedged against by the project sponsors to make sure that the sustainability of the project becomes sustainable and successful. But it is something that we feel has a lot of role, and also given the fact that in sub-Saharan Africa, of the 49 fragile economies in the world, 37 of the fragile economies are found in sub-Saharan Africa. You can imagine what that means when you do not have a strong central fiscus to backstop these projects, where you have extremely weak fiscus to make sure that these projects are protected from currency risk. So it is something that is very, very good, but it is something that is going to be a slow in coming, because it takes the change of attitude from countries as well as project sponsors towards these kinds of offering. So, but it is something that we feel has a very actually critical role to play in the future of the continent and in the sustainability of our projects and economies on the continent. So we're quite positive about it, but we also know that it's not going to be a very quick uptake. It's going to take some time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I think that echoes a lot of some of the points that were being made by Dr. Adesina right at the beginning about how important it is to change systems and the slow grinding but crucial process it takes to make that happen. So thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini, for talking us through that. That is where we're going to have to leave the session one of the day. So thanks again to all our panelists for sharing their experience and analysis so far. Those of you watching the conversation online, do remember that you can share your comments and observations across social media. If you do so, please use the hashtag FICSystem. Well, we're going to give you a quick 5-minute break. So if we meet back here, let's say at 18 minutes past the hour, wherever it is that you find yourself, we'll be able to kick off the next session. Thanks so much for staying with us. See you soon.
Good morning to all, good afternoon to all. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this next session, where we will discuss the unique role of public development banks in increasing access to financing for the African private sector, and especially the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So my name is Emmanuelle Riedel-Drouin. I'm head of the Economic and Financial Transition at the Agence Française de Développement. And I'm delighted to have with me today 5 distinguished panelists. Professor Benedict Orama, who is the president and chairman of the board of directors of Afreximbank. Mrs. Odile Renaud-Bassot, who became the 7th president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development last November. And Mrs. Renaud-Bassot was previously Director General at the French Treasury. We also have Mr. Admasou Tadesse, the Group Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Trade and Development Bank, TDB. Mr. Bruno Venn, Chairman of the European Development Finance Institution, and Mr. Solomon Kenor, who is the Vice President for the Private Sector, Infrastructure, and Industrialization at the African Development Banks. So welcome to all. We saw last year how the COVID-19 pandemic evolved rapidly from a health crisis to a global economic crisis, spreading through all sectors and significantly impacting the private sector, especially the micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs. And we know that MSMEs are crucial in creating local jobs and value-added services and products. In Africa, they account for around 90% of businesses and nearly 60% of employment. We saw how the pandemic has impacted this actor, both on the supply and demand side. Lockdown, quarantines, interruption of supply chains, severe liquidity damages. So these companies are facing today significant difficulties, impacting their financial health and threatening many jobs. So my first question to introduce this panel will be to Professor Orama. Professor Orama, you said last month, I think it was during a session on Africa trade finance, that the tightening global financial conditions that resulted from the crisis triggered massive capital outflows from Africa, significantly straining African banks. So in this regard, what was the role of Afreximbank to support the private sector and particularly SMEs? And I think what would be very interesting for us today is if you could explain the unique value brought by an African public development banks like your institution with its 2 feet firmly grounded in Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emmanuel. But before I start, let me thank President Adesina and Mr. Emiro for bringing this together today. Just as soon as the pandemic started, we launched a coordination meeting of the private sector, the African private sector, which we began to hold every 6 weeks. Attending that meeting, significant players in the private sector space on the continent, the public development banks on the continent, the TDB, African Finance Corporation, and a number of others. And of course, we also have with us attending some of those meetings, friends, development banks from Europe. We normally discuss the view of the private sector about what was happening, the SMEs and the access to finance and so on. What became obvious very, very quickly was that the private sector felt orphaned. All the discussions that were going on at the beginning were how to support the public sector. The debt service suspension initiative, the push for SDRs and all those, didn't put the private sector initially at the center of the discussions. So we launched a pandemic trade impact mitigation facility to support the private sector essentially. We knew that the critical problem the private sector had was being able to continue to trade, being able to continue to produce, especially at a time that the supply chains were shut down. There were also difficulties with regard to paying the backlog of trade debt payments that were falling due. We knew that if this was allowed to happen, if there were defaults, the recovery from the crisis, whenever it occurred, would be very slow and painful. So we launched this pandemic trade impact mitigation facility called PATINFA. And over the period, we disbursed about $6.5 billion as at December last year. And most of that went to the private sector. A subcomponent of this facility actually went to deal with a particular problem Africa felt at the beginning: access to COVID-19 materials, PPEs, test kits, and so on. So working with the UN Economic Commission for Africa, we designed a product to enable companies in Africa to repurpose, to support SMEs. And that helped so many of them. And interestingly, we have quite some interesting results today. Many of them are doing very, very well because they are now producing many of those things that we were not able to access in the early days. And going forward, we also know that our economies will not open unless we bring this virus under control. And just like others are doing, our focus is to make sure that our countries have access to vaccines. And that is why early in the year, working under the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, we put together a $2 billion vaccine acquisition financing, with which the African Union negotiated 400 million doses of vaccines from Johnson & Johnson, which delivery will commence very soon. And I must say again, this represented a collaboration with all the public sector development banks who came together for us to be able to support this financing. I must also say that all through this period, we received tremendous support from our friends from Europe, the European Investment Bank, AFD, KfW, all supported us very, very strongly, providing us very constitutional financing, also complementing the work we are doing, sharing risk with us. That had made it possible for us to do what we are doing. And as we go on to come out of the recovery and begin to implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, again, a lot will depend on how we support the SMEs. And we hope we can continue to work together as public development banks to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rama, and thank you for mentioning these two initiatives, the PATINFA that brought 6.5 billion and the AVAT with the 2 billion, very important. And thank you for the partnership that you already mentioned. Very important in this context. Thank you. My next question will be for Mrs. Odile Renaud-Basso. Mrs. Renaud-Basso, your institution began its work in Central and Eastern Europe, then you expanded the operation in North Africa. In all these countries, the EBRD has worked consistently to support SMEs. During this very peculiar time, during this COVID-19 crisis, did you have to adapt the way that you are working and providing support to SMEs? And did you have to, could you still combine your objective to support the private sector with your aim to really support a transition to a green economy? I think your microphone is still off.
Thank you.
Great.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me today and for your question. So indeed, we are one of our key priority, generally speaking, without the COVID crisis, is indeed to support SMEs. And for that, we have developed what we call a small business investment framework, where we provide financing for SMEs, so either directly or through the banking system, and with different, either it's direct financing or it's guarantees to share the risk. So we have a sort of toolbox to provide financing support to SMEs, intermediated or not intermediated, and so forth. But we are not doing only that, because what we realize is that what SMEs are often missing is competence or know-how and external access to external expertise. So we have also developed what we call an advisory program for SMEs, which help them with access to local consultant, in order to address the key challenges they have to address. It may be growth, access to finance, but it may also be how to develop on export markets, how to enhance their marketing function, how can they start to, if they are, want to expand buying other companies and so forth. So it can be very diverse advisory, and we have been implementing that over years, including in North Africa, with quite a large level of activity starting from 2012, and we expanded, I think, 1.7 billion to SMEs in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, mainly through institutions, but also all this program. So what we've done during the COVID crisis is that we kept all these tools fully available and in full speed, adjusting the way to intervene, for example, moving completely to digital, because advisory activity at that point of time was not possible because of travel, it was not possible in traditional manner. So we shifted everything to digital, and we also focused our advisory activity on how to deal with the COVID crisis. So how to enhance digitalization, how to keep in touch with your clients when you don't have a website, and how to catch up on that. And indeed, what we've seen is a huge catching up in a number of countries that where SMEs were lagging behind in this area. This has really, the COVID crisis and the lockdown situation, the obligation to close shops or restaurants and so forth, that they have really stepped up their capacity to work in a remote manner. So we really help them to develop, for example, a lot of focus was this year on digitalization strategy, and this was an opportunity for a number of SMEs. For example, we've worked with one SME in Egypt, which is a bit like Uber, but for trucks, and to avoid, to ensure logistics in Cairo. And for them, it was a big opportunity in a way because of the development of delivery activity. So that's mainly what we've done, and we have also adjusted for bigger companies. We have adjusted, financing working capital, liquidity needs, which is not something usually we finance project and so forth. So we have adjusted our financing tools to the specific challenges created by the crisis. And on the question of green and SME financing, we do not see any contradiction. On the contrary, for two reasons. First of all, a large part of our activities through the banking sector is also to target finance for green projects. So for example, we are going to finance a bank to provide a loan or to buy some bonds issued by a bank. And then we have the commitment from the bank that they will use the resources given, they got, to finance green project. Or, another thing we are focusing a lot also is women in business, to support women in developing their activities. And this is particularly also relevant in the context of the crisis. So on the green agenda, just to come back on the role of the private sector on the green agenda, I think it's absolutely important. We know that to reach the climate objective that have been set up with the Paris Agreement and so forth, we need money and innovation. Money and innovation come very often from the private sector. And it's clear that we will need to get some private sector financing to deal with the climate change. And what we've been seeing in the last few years, and I think it's a very promising development, is the fact that the solar and the renewable, but in particular the solar energy, if you have the right framework, the right legal framework for auctioning and for allowing private sector investors to come in, then you can have the best outcome possible with the project involving private companies with very low cost, because very often you can implement that through auction mechanism where the company commit on the cost. And on this basis, I think we financed in Egypt, there also one of the projects with the cheapest cost in Africa in terms of solar energy. It was something we signed with African Development Bank, and we are very proud to be able to have finalized this project together with a cost lower than $2.5 per kilowatt with a project Komombo. Sorry, it's very, it's very competitive and very efficient to bring low-cost energy in the country. In Egypt, we have also the project we developed with IFC, which is Benban, which is huge. I mean, one of the largest projects in the world in terms of solar energy, bringing private investors. So really, we do not see contradiction, and on the contrary, we think that if we want to reach the climate objective, we need to bring on the private sector.
Thank you very much, and that's a great conclusion. We saw that, you know, so it was access to finance, but not the same kind of financing. We spoke about liquidity, you spoke about digitalization, advisory, a lot of different food for thought. So I'll turn to you, Mr. Tadesse, to understand maybe on your side. I mean, TDB is a key player in financing the private sector in Africa. You have also a very strong presence in the SME market. You have a wide range of products, of tenors. How did you see your role, and how do you see your role today in supporting young entrepreneurs and SMEs in Africa? And I would like you to answer also, taking into account the fact that you're public development banks and obviously African public development banks. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for the question, and greetings once again to all our friends on the call and the audience. As you've said, Emmanuel, TDB is a diversified regional DFI. We do provide a whole range of services, and we do have a very strong presence in the SME space. One of the things that enables us to really respond and provide solutions effectively to SMEs is being able to provide a diversified set of products and services under a one-stop shop type of arrangement. So we're able to provide the different tenors, as you mentioned, and that, you know, obviously positions us to understand our clients very well. And of course, when one talks about understanding SMEs in Africa, when you're a regional development bank that has only 20 or so countries to look after, you can be a little bit more focused. You end up having deeper knowledge, deeper local networks, and that enables you actually to navigate and to uncover opportunities and actually intermediate financial services in a much more focused and sometimes intensive manner. One can even work with local actors in a way that, of course, is not always possible when you're a much larger multinational that covers so many different countries. And I think that's why we've enjoyed, even within the African setting, very strong partnerships with the African Development Bank. Being a continental player, of course, also sees a value in of course, concerting efforts with regional DFIs like ourselves by providing not just credit, but also risk capital. So of course, the local networks, knowledge, and the roots and all of that makes you quite able to respond to the needs of SMEs, but also, of course, to consider local partnerships with even pension funds, insurance companies, local DFIs, local MFIs, and to be able to do transactions that are also a little bit smaller in size. And of course, because the organics are deep, and of course, one has a lot more how can I say, nuanced understanding, one can actually tailor solutions in a manner that really does respond and also gives them the turnaround time that typically is very sensitive for many of the SMEs. Time is as important as cost of funding. So yes, I think that the local presence and the partnerships do make us a very effective intermediary for development finance, but also private capital to SMEs. For us, of course, we also provide, as you know, trade finance products, and that involves working capital in many instances. And when you're working with SMEs and providing a diversified range of products, you get to understand them a little bit better. And you can do more than just provide term finance. You can provide 3-month credit, 9-month credit. You have a lot more flexibility and a much wider toolkit to actually help them in their specific needs. And so, you end up being a partner that can help them through various seasons that they need support in. And of course, partnerships at the global level as well have been very strong. We are a member of the IDFC, as we are of AADFI, And within the IDFC, as you're aware, we work very closely with the European partners. But one of the things that's happened recently that is quite unusual in our space is for us to have attracted the World Bank Group to follow the African development banks and the EIBs of this world, the AFDs that have been with us over the years. But last year, for the very first time, we were able to enter into a unique partnership with the World Bank Group, both through IDA as well as MIGA. And collectively, we raised almost $1 billion through that new partnership. And that partnership was targeting a specific type of SME, but it could also be slightly larger enterprises to support renewable energy projects. And so, for instance, we launched with the World Bank a $75 million off-grid facility that would help smaller infrastructure players, typically private sector type PPP projects. And so that's a new innovative project that we've launched not so long ago. So partnerships really has many faces. And then, of course, we also had the unusual opportunity last year of partnering with one of our EU friends to actually reach out and support job protection in the context of COVID. And so because we do trade finance with many commercial banks, we understood how some of their clients were suffering in this COVID time. So we were able to apply special purpose funding, very concessional funding to help them underwrite some of the unexpected costs and basically to provide a little bit of a lifeline during that very difficult period when SMEs had no revenue and there were lockdowns and all sorts of unintended and unforeseen challenges. And so we were able to blend in a way that we've not blended before, and that really enabled us to provide a new thrust to support SMEs, through this very difficult period as well. So partnerships have been growing for us in a very very robust way, and of course I think the missing piece I think now of course remains risk capital, and I think this is where we've been encouraging our international partners to follow the example of the African Development Bank, which not provides only credit, which is nowadays not so hard to get. But they provide risk capital, and risk capital has become a binding constraint. And so this has paved the way for us now to launch new offerings to European partners, amongst others. And we'll be hopefully launching a green share, what we call a special segment within our capital structure that would allow us to scale up with green financing as well as SDG financing. And we are expecting to have a special session on that during the Africa Investment Forum later this year, together with the African Development Bank. But of course, the Financing Common Summit, as took place in November last year, was very clear about scaling up capital to African Pdbs. The bigger ones, like the ADB and AfriExim and ourselves, we've been much more fortunate than many of the African Pdbs who really struggled to scale up because of their configuration and their natural DNA. But I think with this new thrust that we're seeing come through with FIX and this new commitment to African Pdbs, we hope that there'll be much more resources that can come through, because many of the national development banks and even subnational banks are the ones who are much closer to the much smaller enterprises that we know are difficult to reach.
Thank you very much. And thank you for both pointing the partnership need between the larger regional banks like yourself, Afrexim Bank, African Development Banks, and the role also that you may have with national banks that are smaller and maybe more fragile than the largest regional banks. Thank you very much. You spoke a lot about partnerships, so I want to turn to Mr. Bruno Venn. I want to turn to you because in November 2020 last year, during the Financing Commons Summit, you launched a coalition of around 20 public development banks to work on recovery of the private sector. This coalition was composed of the European DFI, USDFC, FinDev Canada, the African Development Banks, the BOAD was also part of this coalition. So I think we are all really curious to know more about the objective of this coalition, and maybe understand the need that you saw at that time for this platform. And if I can add a last question, you also launched a challenge last November where this coalition was to dedicate around $4 billion by the end of 2021 to help MSMEs to face the crisis. So we are still early in 2021, but I think we all would like to know how this is going and if you're on track. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Emmanuel. Let me start by thanking the African Development Banks, the Association of African Development Finance Institutions, and the International Development Finance Club for the organization of the Spring Meeting of Finance in Common. And I think that this meeting is an excellent opportunity to illustrate how public development banks promote synergies and implement what has been committed last year. We at the European Development Finance Institutions are committed to foster private investment for the sustainable, green and inclusive development in Africa. The coalition was launched at the first summit of the public development banks you have mentioned of Finance in Common Summit in November last year. And we are extremely proud that we achieved this coalition, and I'm very pleased that the Trade and Development Bank has joined us in January this year. Many thanks, Atmaso, for this important support. The coalition has committed to deepen cooperation among institutions because we know that especially the COVID-19 pandemic calls for much more closer cooperation by exchanging information, facilitating co-investment operations between our institutions, cooperating more on policy dialogue, which is urgently needed, and market development activities that will be essential to speed up recovery. And we have committed to focus on inclusive financial solutions for the private sector. What does it mean? It means that we try to protect as much as possible the employment for vulnerable populations by financing micro, small and medium-sized enterprises via financial intermediaries and workers in the informal economy through microfinance institutions, which includes also local currency solutions, which are very much needed. Benedict has already referred to. We committed to support clients with technical assistance advisory solutions because we feel there is a need for technical assistance, grants, advisory support to local financial intermediaries to increase access to finance for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises Odile has also referred to. And finally, we committed to dedicate at least 4 billion for African micro, small and medium-sized enterprise by the end of 2021. Why we have created the coalition? We feel, or we see that Africa feel and will continue to feel disproportionately the economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The crisis has intensified existing development finance and challenges, and we feel that we must turn those challenges into a unique opportunity for building back better and leaving no one behind during the recovery phase, especially the smaller businesses and entrepreneurs. Their role is crucial for recovery of growth and jobs in Africa, as they account for more than 60% of employment, Emmanuel, you have already referred to. And we as public development banks and development finance institutions have a critical role to play in supporting the crisis response in Africa. Our institutions provide the financing and the technical assistance to help save businesses and jobs at a time when private financial flows have slowed down. And we see the need for actions and for working together. As AADFI, we provide a large portion of the European development finance for the private sector in Africa. We are proud, very proud to lead these joint efforts. Our collective portfolio of more than $100 billion is committed to private sector operations in low and middle income countries, supporting more than 12 million direct jobs, with over 40% of this in Africa. While many private sector enterprises have proven resilient, continued access to finance will be necessary to help existing and new clients to survive, to protect jobs and to recover. The coalition plays an important role in providing financial support through African finance institutions and directly to corporates, as well as leading private investors back into African markets. Financing micro, small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa is crucial. Improved access to finance to those enterprises will be critically important to boost growth and to provide jobs for the 450 million young Africans projected to join the labor market by 2050. Our initiative focuses on the cooperation to have an efficient and effective response to finance those enterprises in need. As I've already mentioned, the pandemic has revealed the importance of strong cooperation, for which we as AADFI have a track record for a long time. Our practice over the past decades is rooted in cooperation both at European and international level. Today, European DFIs rely on cooperation at all levels of the organization, which sets the grounds for trust and transparency amongst the members and allows the group to achieve more than the sum of its parts. What do we have achieved so far? In this challenging market environment, we are well on track with our ambitions to unlock capital for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Out of the $4 billion pledged by the coalition, I'm glad to confirm that by December 2020, already $1.3 billion have been committed, plus additional $7 million technical assistance to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. With the crisis lasting longer than expected, we are working to scale up the coalition in terms of number of partner institutions and to extend the coalition beyond the year 2021. We can only deliver an adequate response through strong cooperation. And this is why I like to close by calling on other finance institutions to join the coalition in our joint ambition to promote micro, small and medium-sized financing in Africa. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see that the coalition is on track, and we heard your call to other partners to join. Thank you very much. So I'll turn now to the African Development Bank and to Solomon, who is with us today. So, Solomon, you know the Summit on Financing African Economy, which will take place next Tuesday in Paris, is highlighting the private sector as a driver for long-term growth in Africa. We know that the African Development Bank is a key actor in Africa. And I would like for you to tell us maybe about what you're doing right now with African MSMEs, but also what you're doing with other African public development banks. And there was a question in the chat on that, asking like, what are you doing with the largest one, but also what you may be doing with the smallest development banks in Africa. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Emmanuel. And you know, as co-sponsors for the spring meeting, we thought it would be best if I came last, you know, at least in the initial conversation. 2020 was really the year of stabilization, and I want to put emphasis on that. And given that, you know, as the African Development Bank, we're able to do both public sector and private sector, you know, our approach is really to deliver solutions. So one of the key things we did in 2020 is we engaged with, you know, our regional and also national public development banks. We also engaged with our commercial banking clients. And in addition, we also engaged with governments to really understand, you know, what were the issues they were grappling with and how best could we help resolve it. You know, as you know, most typical DFIs, we also engaged with our private sector clients in our portfolios. And as we did this, we realized that, you know, supporting at that time in terms of stabilization directly, you know, the financial institutions was not really where we were going to get the best value for money. So once again, along the solution approach, we pivoted and we actually began to support SMEs significantly through the support we provided to governments. And let me expand. So the support to governments during that stabilization period was essentially threefold. You know, one, naturally to help strengthen health systems. Two, to provide social safety nets, you know, for the disadvantaged. But the third was really focused around economic stabilization and particularly the most vulnerable private sector, which is SMEs. So this is where governments were able to provide, you know, credit, you know, enhancement schemes during this period. They were able to provide, you know, some tax waivers and really many solutions to, you know, to ultimately stabilize private sector companies so that jobs will be protected and in particular SMEs. So this is really what we focused on in 2020. This is, you know, why we actually developed an up to $10 billion crisis response facility. And in addition, we also issued the $3 billion social bond. So that was 2020. But now is the time of recovery. And so your question is really, what are we doing going forward in terms of focus around MSMEs? First of all, I think Ambrose of EIB had mentioned Boost Africa, where we're working with EIB as well. And this approach we're taking is what we call a life cycle approach. We don't, focus just on products, but we try to figure out how we support MSMEs across their life cycle. So Boost Africa is really intended to provide, early risk capital, equity, quasi-equity capital, to, through a fund of funds approach to support mostly youth entrepreneurs, tech-enabled companies. And so this is really one of the vehicles that we're working with. As we think going forward, we're paying attention to the African demographic, which is significantly women. And when you help one woman, you're helping 5 others in the household. And this is actually a very important principle to our approach on the SME side. And then we're also looking at the youth bulge, where we have 450 million youth, and we expect this number to double probably in the next decade. So AFAWA, which is a $5 billion program, is one of the anchor programs that we have on the SME side. And this is where we're working with, various development, institutions, commercial banks, but also development institutions like the African Guarantee Fund. But in addition, we're working really with, some of our public development banks like BOAD, IDC, et cetera, to provide funding to them to then on-lend directly to women SMEs. But it's not just really support on the financing, but we're also supporting really in improving the business enabling environment in those markets. And we're also supporting, through the business development services that the underlying SMEs need. But we won't stop there. We are also working with the financial institutions that we support to make sure that they really understand, to provide the right products, have the right risk management to really scale up on the SME side. Now, one of the other marquee, projects that we're looking at, and, President Adesina talked about it earlier, is what we're calling a Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank. And our plan is to really roll this out across Africa. It's essentially a public development bank, okay? It's going to have, a PPP structure in each country where, MDBs, like ourselves and others, we hope to crowd in, as well as governments, whether through the, public development banks or directly from the ministries of finance or even the central banks that have development mandates would also contribute in establishing these youth entrepreneurship investment banks. And once again, it's not to create a single solution, but this will be an anchor, for the youth ecosystem, that would be able to bring in other venture capitalists, other private equity funds to invest in youth businesses, okay, to bring in the business development services, to bring in the mentoring coaching, to also even bring the commercial banks at the later point in the life cycle. So these are some of the things that we're doing on the SME side. Now, in terms of public development banks, we've always believed in a network approach. So this is part of the reason why we have equity investments in TDB, in Africa Finance Corporation, Africa 50, and also AfriExim. We've been founding shareholders in all of these regional DFIs. But in addition, we're working really with the public development banks on a national level, because we see all of these groups really as partners in ultimately delivering climate resilience and green growth in those markets. And so for us, we will continue with that strategy. We've provided billions of dollars, to these institutions, whether it's risk capital or credit facility, as Admasu said. We'll continue to look for additional resources, through partner institutions in Europe, the US, et cetera, because we have a close relationship with all of these institutions. We work very closely with AADFI, and we ultimately believe that if we're going to mainstream, the quality infrastructure or quality investment principles, which is around climate resiliency, the public development banks are an absolute partner in across the continent. So, Emmanuel, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all our panelists. I'm gonna have to conclude in 2-3 minutes because I know Georgia is waiting for section 3. I think what we can I mean, what's striking in this one table is the role that you all describe of public development banks toward MSMEs, both financing. You spoke about direct financing with a range of different instruments. You remind us the importance of capital and debt. Also financing through financial institution, be it like MFI or like larger financial institution. You also told us the importance of the business environment and advisory, not just financing. It's really a holistic approach that is needed. I think it was really important also to have in mind was Mr. Tadesse told us and Mr. Professor Orama about the unique role also of African public development banks that have deep local networks and the importance of partnership between the African public development banks and the European DFI and the BRD, since we had in this panel both European DFI and African development banks. And I'll finish with what Solomon told us about the network approach, with really the development financial institution, the public development banks, working with regional public development banks that in turns are working with national public development banks, and the African development banks has worked for a very long time, both in equity and debt with all this network of public development banks. So I'll stop here. I really want to thank you all for this really interesting panel, and I'm sure we'll all turn to next Tuesday for the Summit on Financing Economy in Paris. Thank you very much, and Georgia, I'll give you back the floor.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Okay, so I think we are, before we head into our next session, I'm going to give everyone a quick break. So we will be meeting back here, let's say 2 minutes past the hour. So go rehydrate, stretch your legs, and then rejoin us for what will no doubt be a fascinating discussion between Mr. Thabo Temani, Helmut Galgis, Khalid Sharif, and Serge Ekwe. See you shortly. So welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. Time now for our third session of the day, which will look at challenges faced by African PDBs, how to unlock their potential to finance sustainable investments in Africa. Now, before we hear from our panelists, just a few words. Currently, 95 African public development banks operate at subnational, national, regional, and multilateral levels. They invest about $24 billion every year and are part of the continent's financial system. But there's still ways to go for the African PDB community to unleash its full potential and make bigger inroads into the achievement of the Paris Agreement's objectives and the SDGs. So during this session, we'll be taking a closer look at the challenges faced by African PDBs and ways to tackle them. And to join me for this, we have Mr. Thabo Teman, who's the chairman of the Association of African Development Finance Institutions, the AADFI, and CEO of the Citizen Entrepreneurial Development Agency. Thanks so much for being with us today, Mr. Teman. We also have Mr. Helmut Galges, who's a member of the management committee of KfW Development Bank. Thanks so much for being with us, Mr. Galges.
Thank you.
Dr. Khaled Sharif, who's the vice president of the African Development Bank Group. Dr. Sharif, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And Mr. Serge Ekwe, who's the president of the West African Development Bank. Mr. Ekwe, great to have you here today with the rest of our esteemed panelists.
Georgia, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by posing the first question to everyone with us here today on the panel. COVID-19 has clearly created a liquidity crisis that could evolve into a debt crisis. As a PDB, how has that impacted your operations and what have you done to mitigate the risks? So I'll come to you first, Mr. Thabo Teman.
Thank you, Georgia, for having me, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in this wonderful continent. And let me first of all thank Dr. Adesina and Remiru, my good friend, for making this quite possible. And you know, the impact of COVID-19 is unprecedented in the history of mankind. It's with global socio-economic activities brought down all at the same time. And the impact has been in various ways. And I'll just mention a few because I've got other colleagues also who would chip in. You know, there's a liquidity squeeze. Colleagues, as you know, most African PDBs depend on their governments for budgetary allocation. This has really had an impact on the PDBs, and it has also now affected the development mandate as it has been compromised. And, remember, when you talk to, the situation in African countries, their needs were huge even before the crisis. I mean, they had to develop, the education sector, infrastructure, power, sanitation, you name it. And this has really now sort of canceled decades of economic growth and social improvement. So that's one of the biggest impact this has had. And then secondly, the cost of funding has actually gone up because, PDBs have prioritized funding. They've cut on new funding because they've got into survival modes. Even businesses, MSMEs have got into survival mode. So it's very difficult to create avenues for funding new deals. So in a nutshell, I think there's a huge business risk, and business people are very reluctant to get into businesses because PDBs or other lenders are not necessarily patient with their capital, and this is what you need: patient capital. I think let me just stop there to allow other colleagues to chip in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for kicking us off, Mr. Teman. Helmut Galges, what's your professional experience been in terms of the impact of the pandemic, and what's KfW's response been?
Yeah, thank you very much for being invited to this interesting session. I will talk more from a donor perspective from industrialized country. And what we see, as Thabo Teman said, developing emerging countries are more affected by the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic than industrialized countries. Not so far directly by the COVID, virus, much more because the health and social systems and economies are often less resilient compared to those in industrialized countries. And the pandemic puts development cooperation now even more in the political spotlight when it already is due to issues of refugees, climate changes, and SDGs. National, international, and multilateral development banks have a special responsibility as a counter-cycle financiers due to the corona crisis. We as KfW have quickly reacted to these challenges of pandemic. Globally, by responding to the needs of our partner countries, but also domestic. In Germany, only in Germany, we committed more than 70 billion euro to the German economy. So you see, this is a really big challenge, even for us, as we are not a little bank. Thanks to the commitment of our colleagues in the 70 field office in the developing countries, and the successful switch to a kind of digital communication, including with our partners, programs were able to move forward efficiently and quickly, and sometimes more quickly than normally. And 4 billion euro, that is 1/3 of our total financial commitments. Last year we had 11 billion euro commitments, are now directly related to mitigating the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. 36% of these commitments went to programs in African partner countries. Our support to developing countries has been multiple. Short-term pandemic response in the health sector. Second, mitigating in the social and economic consequences of a crisis to maintain peace and stability. And third, projects in food security, social security, job security, refugee and crisis regions. And even much more important, liquidity for companies and also states. And the fourth pillar is in the medium or to long term, now reconstruction programs are also aimed at climate compatibility and resilience to further pandemics and crises. With respect to the rising public debt levels, KfW follows the guiding principle of responsible finance. This means that loans are granted on the basis of debt sustainability assessment. For example, most countries in Africa, they get from us grants or very low interest loans. In this context, it's important to distinguish short-term liquidity constraints from medium and long-term debt crisis. In fact, public debt levels have risen to many African economies and already before the pandemic, since the mid-2000s and after various debt relief initiatives like HIPIC. Moreover, many African countries are no longer indebted only to traditional multilateral and bilateral donors, but became increasingly indebted to private creditors. China has become a major creditor to African economies. International initiatives such as the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, now extended for the third time until the end of 2021, have helped to overcome short-term liquidity constraints. To provide debt relief to states with unsustainable public debt levels, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The solution must be tailored to the individual country needs. Private creditors must be included in the negotiation. I think this is very important. And China, of course. In turn, African countries need to increase domestic public revenue, which will be now, after the crisis, very, very difficult and a big challenge, and improve on financial governance indicators and public financial management. Thank you so far.
Thanks so much, Helmut. Dr. Sharif, tell us a bit more about how the AFDB's operations have been affected.
Well, the AFDB's operations have been obviously affected in a number of ways. And first and foremost, just to begin, the pandemic so far has really not had devastating health effects on the majority of African countries. But over 20 African nations depend on no more than 3 primary exports for between 50 to 70% of their foreign exchange earnings. With the collapse of commodity markets, the COVID-19 pandemic has been economically devastating to several African countries, which are basically not economically resilient. So what we've already seen is Africa is suffering or suffered in 2020 its worst recession in 50 years. GDP contracted by 2.1%, throwing an estimated 30 million people back into extreme poverty. And so for the African Development Bank, and given the realization of what we were dealing with come 2019, President Adesina's instructions were very clear that we had to retool our support for our regional member countries to make sure that we provided the kind of stimulus that these countries needed so desperately going into 2020, so they can start building back and hopefully build back better. And so with what the African Development Bank realized very early on, that without stimulus, many of our regional member countries who were running into a foreign exchange crisis needed stimulus to be able to make sure that they don't find themselves mired in their inability to pay current debt obligations. So I'll give you an example. So there are the big 6 oil producing countries in Africa. Those big 6, 4 of the big 6 depend on 70% of their foreign exchange from oil. When oil hit its all-time low, most had budgeted their fiscal year assuming that oil was going to be above $50 per barrel. When we got to levels of $20 per barrel and below, many of these countries were finding it difficult to meet their debt service obligations. So we retooled our entire lending program. We retooled everything, even down to our grant facilities, to make sure that our regional member countries across the continent had access to stimulus, and we provided roughly about $5 billion in stimulus in 2020. We continue to provide more. And as you can see, every country in Europe, the United States, they're investing trillions of dollars to build back their economies. And without stimulus, obviously, countries will be mired in a debt trap. They will face difficulties of not being able to service their debts. They will be downgraded, leading those countries to have to borrow at higher interest rates. And our vision, the president's vision, was very clear: to create stimulus, to use every resource at our disposal to provide stimulus to regional member countries of the African Development Bank to help them offset their foreign exchange losses.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sharif. Mr. Echoes, we heard that from Mr. Sharif a bit about the devastating impact that the continent's already suffered because of COVID-19 and even before, and this need to retool support to African nations. Now, you're focused more regionally. Would you be able to share your insights with us on the question of how the liquidity crisis has affected the operations of PDBs?
Well, Georgia, thank you for your question. Thank you for giving me the floor here. But before answering to your very question, I would like to thank Remy Rioux and President Adesina for inviting me to this major event, becoming, as a matter of fact, as kind of a benchmark in the industry, and giving me the opportunity to address the audience on the challenges of the Pdbs. So thank you for all this. Well, now answering to your very question, Georgia, when you look at things in reality, instead of a liquidity crisis, I would rather speak of a liquidity demand. Well, indeed, our actions help prevent a liquidity crisis to emerge in our sub-region. That was the rationale of our COVID programs, dedicating 300 million euro for the public sector and the sovereign, and 150 million euro approximately for the private sector. Overall, we have had a 400 million euro as an immediate response to the crisis. And indeed, the challenge was to avoid any liquidity and debt crisis. And we did so by making sure our programs deliver sustainable debts. Regarding sovereign, regarding the different states, the BOAD has offered long-term a debt with 5 years deferred at a concessional rate of 2.75% for the private sector. We also offered softened conditions with immediate disbursements. And besides this, I wish to emphasize that the ONU Commission and the Central Bank, BCAO, have been instrumental, truly instrumental in our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, thanks to their exceptional, and I really mean it, exceptional additional subsidy resources summing up to 60 million euro. Member states were also given the possibility to emit special short-term COVID bonds, benefiting from a COVID special refinancing facility at a fixed rate of 2.5% over the life of the loan. So this has been actually swift and I believe effective and efficient, as we have all understood back then that cash was indeed king. That's all for me at this point in time. Thank you, Georgia.
Well, Mr. Ekowe, I'm not going to let you go just yet. I mean, we heard there a bit about some of the very kind of targeted responses that you've overseen. But more generally, do you think that African PDBs are ambitious enough in their financing of sustainable investments on the continent? And what would you like to see in terms of helping them to raise their game on that front?
If you realize that, and that was the case actually, that really cash was king, and I think that really happened. This reality blew up, and we all understood that we had to have swift and immediate action with soft and quick disbursement. I think that was the appropriate response to the crisis. And that is a good lesson learned to prevent or to face the forthcoming one. Because we will, today we are discussing about COVID-19. We will probably one day or another have to face the COVID-20 or 21, I don't know. But this capacity to understand that, these kind of exogenous shocks has happened and will probably happen again. I think the way we have all understood that, again, cash was king, I think it's a proper and the right answer, the right response. Now, in terms of strengths and our capacity to do more, we will, and if I may, we will discuss this down the road. I think the next question we will address this very point, because it's all related to this capacity we need to have to strengthen our tier 1 capital, to raise funds in the market, etc., etc. But the conscience that the right response was that the cash was king, I think this is key. And naturally, there's a question of level for the right response. But I do believe that the response we have made for our sub-region was appropriate at the right level.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Mr. Ekowe. Mr. Tani, what's your take on this? What do you see as PDBs needing to transform bigger and better in terms of their ability to support sustainable objectives? That question to Mr. Taman.
Thank you. I think you got cut, Georgia. Sorry.
So basically, it was just a follow on from what Mr. Ekowe there was responding to. I was asking you, what do you think PDBs need to be able to transform bigger and better in order to support sustainable objectives?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just like Mr. Ekowe, in terms of what PDBs need to do is that you need very strong leadership, Georgia. You need extremely strong leadership, and you need very good governance structures. Because in crisis times, there lies an opportunities to get funds to trickle down to other issues that are not necessarily core to fight this pandemic and to really survive businesses. I think for me, if you have very strong leadership in PDBs, they can achieve whatever strategies that they would put in place in terms of reviewing their business strategies and processes, in terms of invoking their business continuity plans. But you need strong leadership on that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so Mr. Galgers, from an international perspective, what do you see as international partners being able to do to better support African PDBs to bolster their capacity and encourage more climate and sustainable development investments?
Thank you. You're right. African PDBs have to be ambitious, and I think they are ambitious. Besides now to adverse impacts, the short-term impacts of a pandemic, they must help to rebuild in a more sustainable way and to become resilient against future crises, be it pandemic, natural disasters, or other crises. This is why we reinforce our commitments to strengthen resilience, green finance, and the climate agenda, as also the SDGs. Among the leading promotional banks worldwide, KfW has really long-standing experience, more than 70 years. We started in the domestic business, but also 20 years later, or less than 20 years later, in the development aid. And our experience is already that investments in energy efficiency, renewable energies, as well as strengthening climate resilience represent good, profitable investments, be it for countries, cities, or companies. Building on this experience we had in Germany, we have been able to accompany our African partners, especially in the process of foundation of PDPs, like in Tunisia, like in Ghana, or like in Nigeria. In addition, KfW has a leading role in the IDFC and closely cooperates with various national and regional PDBs on the African continent. I cannot now give you all the names, but I already said Nigeria, Rwanda, Namibia, South Africa, the board, the PTB, the Afrexim Bank, and also, of course, the AFDB, and also our neighbors in Northern Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt. Our objective is not only to strengthen the role of African PDPs themselves, but also to contribute to the development of financial systems of our partner countries. We support African partners in financial system development, using a broad range of financial instruments tailored to our partners' needs, ranging from credit lines, equity investments, grants, guarantees, insurance, capacity building, or local currency lending and policy-based finance. Among the key areas in financial system developments are SME finance, of course, climate green finance, insurance and risk finance, agriculture finance, and the development of capital markets. This includes, of course, also green bonds. We have been the first bank in Germany who brought green bonds in the capital market. So far, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mr. Galgers. Dr. Sharif, what do you see as being the bank's challenges specifically in moving towards inclusive and sustainable growth? And how do you do so in a way that sees operations that foster tangible change for both African PDBs and people?
Well, obviously, I can't speak to other African PPDs, but I will, for the African Development Bank, our vision as an institution, our vision of our president, is really predicated on the concept of making sure that we have strategies that are specific to countries, and not just specific to countries, specific to the different local development needs within those countries. So to give you an example, we have 18 countries of 54 countries in Africa where you see GDP growth in real terms, 3-4% on a continuous basis. But then when you look at GDP per capita, growth in GDP per capita does not keep up with, in real terms, with growth in real terms of GDP. Sometimes it may even decline. So in the African Development Bank, we clearly understand the phenomenon in some of our fragile states that we see countries get richer, but citizens of those countries get poorer. So how can that be? And it's easily explainable because of the poverty trap many of our fragile states find themselves in. So if you look at GDP as just in simple definition, GDP being consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports, when you have countries that export no more than 3 to 5 products with really no value addition. I mean, they're exporting coffee beans, but not the coffee, cocoa beans, but not the chocolate. So you always have that trade deficit which is perennial because they have to import processed goods while they export raw materials. So you're dealing with a consistent trade deficit. Government does not have deep pockets, so they can't do major infrastructure investments as a way of stimulating economies or creating jobs like other countries, middle-income countries, can do when they have the budgets to allow for government expenditures as a way out of slow growth or job creation. So in these countries of fragility, they don't have that. Investment is also muted in many of these countries because domestic consumption is very, very low. So when you have economies, 18 to 24 countries where people live off between $2 to $5 a day, they have their consumption is limited because at $2 to $5 a day, you're living hand to mouth. If you don't have disposable income, you're not consuming. If you're not consuming, in turn, you're not sending a signal to the private sector to invest. If you're not sending a signal to the private sector to invest, the private sector, the domestic private sector isn't investing, and the investment that you're getting is basically offshore investment, usually coming in to take resources of a country and to export them where the wealth is. So without wealth creation, without growth in consumption, you're not going to get domestic investment. And you'll see foreign direct investment, especially in extractives or in precious metals, pushing GDP to go higher, but GDP per capita is not going higher because these foreign direct investments in extractives, in precious metals aren't trickling down to creating wealth at the broader community level. So the African Development Bank sees wealth creation as an absolute need. Our strategies are built on raising disposable incomes, raising consumptions by a variety of interventions to promote wealth creation as a way of getting out of this poverty trap and as a way out of making sure that our most fragile countries have a vehicle where as GDP grows in real terms, GDP per capita grows with it. And that's the dichotomy that exists in Africa. And Africa is a series of complicated countries that need development strategies that are singularly identified, that understand and clearly create a roadmap for growth. And the African Development Bank is looking at every situation specifically with a vision for a country strategy and a way to ensure that growth is sustainable and that after COVID-19, every country can build back, but the whole concept of building back better depends on how serious the development challenges were even before COVID-19. Thank you, Georgia. Back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Galgez. Thanks very much, Khaled. I'm just going to actually bounce back to you, Mr. Galgez. You were talking there a little bit earlier on about the efforts that your bank goes to collaborate with kind of African entities and African PDBs. Is this consideration of how well the impact trickles down and how tangible it is for people, something that you take on board when you start in your operations and in terms of partnering with African PDBs?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, for us, it's important what we do together with the African PDBs is what trickles down to the people, and this might be very different from case to case. And as I also said, SME finance is one of our most important pillars in the cooperation, but means creating jobs in Africa, but also creating enterprises. Africa needs more entrepreneurs, starting as a little enterprise and getting better and larger. So what we're looking is not only to finance the PDBs, what we are looking is what is the development impact of the PDBs in the country, or if it's a regional PDB in the region. And this is utmost important for us. And we want to see that it works. And we are convinced that together in a close cooperation, we can support the PDBs, helping to build better economies in African countries. And as has been said, the economies are very fragile.
So much, Mr. Gagas. Well, thank you again to all of our panelists, because unfortunately that is all we have time for now. A reminder to those of you who may be following the conversation online that you can do feel free to share any observations, comments, or thoughts that you have that arise from the conversations that you're watching across social media. We're going to leave it there for now, a brief 5-minute break, and then I will invite you to return for the closing remarks from Mr. Rémi Roux, Mr. Tabou Teman, and the AFD's president.
Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Not long to go now. In a little recap, today's conversation between African public development banks and their non-African development partners has hopefully been insightful and hopeful. It's highlighted the needs and hurdles that Africa is facing as it increasingly pivots towards sustainable development, in particular in dealing with the challenges posed by climate change and private sector development. The African public development banks gathered today around the African Development Bank are keenly aware that their mandate is to finance the transitions and transformation of African economies towards a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. The COVID-19 crisis has made this mandate more relevant than ever. So, Mr. Riou, Mr. Taban, and President Adesina, before you deliver your concluding remarks, you allow me a minute to pause here, because the African public development banks that took part in today's conversations have been working on a joint declaration that was displayed during the health break. Since the joint declaration will be made available on the AFDB and the Finance in Common website, I won't go through it in its entirety here, but I will highlight some key takeaways. Through that joint declaration, African public development banks have confirmed the importance of moving forward on climate, SDGs, private sector development, the fight against poverty in Africa. They've confirmed their willingness to finance the needed transitions and transformation of African economies in the context of COVID-19 towards sustainable, resilient, and equitable development. They have confirmed their need to receive greater access to concessional resources, as well as reinforcement of their capital base, taking advantage of the expected SDR's allocation. So I believe this joint declaration is one of the main outcomes of today's conversation, especially in the context of the summit on financing the African economies that's been convened by French President Emmanuel Macron next week on the 18th of May. So endorsed by the AADFI, the BOAD, DBSA, and in the presence of the IDFC's president, this declaration will surely shape the African Development Bank and its partners' participation next week's summit on financing the African economies. So to round up the day's talks about how to help PDBs make the most of their potential in steering and supporting sustainable African growth, we now have a few words. First, from Mr. Remy Riou. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgia. And yes, what a pleasure, what an honor. I'm so proud of all of you. I was struck really following it very carefully of the quality of this meeting, its depth of thoughts, and also its freshness. I mean, again, this is uncharted territories somehow that we are collectively exploring. And really, with the various points of view around the table, I think the role of public development banks was very clearly established by all participants, meaning this capacity to lend liquidities deep into countries, into local fabrics. It's their capacity to originate, Rachel said it, way more quality projects. Also, unique role to de-risk and mobilize the private sector, especially SMEs and spur innovation, startups, incubators, youth, women initiatives, and also their role to structure financial markets. We talked a lot about climate and SDG bonds. So really, the beauty of public banks is not that they stand for themselves, but that they are connectors, linking global and local, short-term and long-term, public and private, government and civil society, and have always been. And so they are key components in each and every country, and not only in Africa by far, for the development of our societies. What was very clear also is the need to strengthen African PDBs. Already about 100 of them, so many in this virtual room. New burgeoning. I remember Ngozi creating the Nigerian Development Bank. I know there's a new one in Ghana. Many things happening, many capital increases, BOAD, TDB, recently the African Development Bank ongoing. So the direction is extremely positive, but combined, the aggregated balance sheet of all African public banks is still about 1% of the size of these 2.23 trillions we mentioned in the preliminary remarks. That is the size of the whole world, the whole family of public banks. So there's certainly a lot to do. And why not start with Africa? I mean, why not innovate and imagine the system, the architecture that will give full capacity to these institutions in your region. And the position taken by President Adesina as the leader of a key multilateral development bank, opening arms, embarking, working, co-financing with regional and national development banks is, of course, absolutely crucial. And I think there's a connection, an organization that is reachable in Africa that will reverberate and be an example and be valid for other regions. So this is what this Finance in Common spring meeting is about, going farther than what we did last year in terms of organization. And I stop by saying that all partners were here, are around this building up, and you can count on us. AFD, I'm heading, provided 2 billion euro last year for public banks, through public banks, meaning about 20% of our total activity last year. You heard European colleagues, Ambroise for EIB, Kuhn for the European Commission, Helmut for KfW, Bruno for the European DFIs, and colleagues from Italy, colleagues from Spain, colleagues from the practitioners network are also paying a very close attention to what you are doing. I would, of course, Asian colleagues are also there. I'm the head of the IDFC. JICA is a key member of the IDFC, so active in Africa. The China Development Bank also is investing in the region and the member of the IDFC. And I think the Asian Development Bank President Asakawa couldn't attend, but also providing the Asian experience to what you are building, and colleagues from America, USDFC, FinDev Canada, others are also paying a close attention. So this is something very innovative, brand new, exemplary, that is around, that is here. And please, let's pass collectively and individually the message to our leaders, especially in the perspective of next week summit, that we are there, we are willing, we are at their disposal to support the private sector and to finance SDGs and the fight against climate change. I think that was made very clear from the various interventions, and I thank all participants for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rémi Roux, President of the International Development Finance Club. Strong words of support there in a bid to strengthen PDBs. And as Mr. Roux said, there's a lot to do, so why not start with Africa? I would now like to hand the floor over to Mr. Tabu Taman, the Chairman of the AADFI and CEO of SIDA. Mr. Taman.
Thank you, Georgia, and let me recognize Dr. Adesina and Remy Roux, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank our partners, AFDB, IDFC, for joining hands in putting this program together. We are most grateful to Dr. Adesina and Mr. Roux. The Finance in Common has become a veritable platform to engage in conversations on very critical issues that impinge on the actualization of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement in our countries across the African continent. This pre-meeting has proved useful, coming as a follow-up to our declaration at the first Finance in Common Summit held in November 2020. Therefore, it is of particular interest for the African public development banks to commit to the outcome of the summit. To commit, as Remy has said, the support is there. And today's meeting has therefore set the tone to sustain the drive in ensuring that Africa is not left behind in the global development equation post-COVID-19 era. And I must say that, from today's meeting, it is very clear that we must move from talk to action. Plan A must be action, plan B action, plan C must be action. The important role that the African Pdbs have to play in unlocking their potential to finance sustainable investments and the needed transitions and transformation of African economies in the context of COVID-19 crisis have well been articulated today. We've also noted the challenges and potential obstacles for Pdbs in delivering these mandates. Nonetheless, there is where the relevance of Finance in Common lies to strengthen the cooperation amongst Pdbs and other stakeholders in galvanizing the required support for financing sustainable investment that will guarantee inclusive development and deliver shared prosperity on the continent. Imagine the trade between all African countries. I can just imagine it. The African Pdbs, particularly the national, subnational Pdbs, the Association of African DFIs, the World Federation of African DFIs, reaffirm their commitment in working with other partners to intensify their involvement in mobilizing innovative resources, deploying such resources sustainably for financing investment towards achieving the SDGs and the Paris Agreement goals. Let me thank our distinguished speakers, colleagues, for sharing their thoughts and commitment to this project. And to end this, I've invited Remy Roux, last time we were in Washington, to visit Botswana and to witness the majestic of Kavango. And I also invited Dr. Adesina to come to Botswana. I will be their host. We shall sustain the momentum in working together to achieve our common goal. We have to prevail and we will prevail. Thank you and merci.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tamani. What I hope Mr. Roux and Mr. Adesina have a chance to take you up on your, what sounds like a very appealing and potentially very very important offer of hosting them. Thank you so much for your words to wrap us up today. But before we finally leave, and satisfyingly coming full circle, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group, to deliver the final speech of the day. Dr. Adesina.
Thank you, Georgia. First and foremost, let me also thank my dear brother, Remy Roux, for an incredible job again, bringing all us together, but also to thank Thabo for his impressive leadership. And thank you for that. Well, welcome. I can tell you that Remy and I will make sure that we can have a visit in common to discuss finance in common together with you. I'd like to thank all the distinguished participants for taking the time off your busy schedules from around the world to join us for these discussions today. What did we hear? I start with what I heard really from Remy, and he made a very, very powerful point. He said Africa is a global priority. And I think if Africa is a global priority, then working together to fast track Africa's development and Africa's recovery is critical as we deal with this global pandemic and the recovery process. What I also heard was that without the finance in common, we cannot fix it. That's what Cohen said. I think that was really very powerful, the way in which we have to work together to fix the challenges. And those challenges are many, and the opportunities also many. We heard that we need to connect countries and partners in particular, national, regional, and at a global level. Remy just mentioned that. The need for us to focus on counter-cyclical financial role that we all play. The need to realize that as we recover, we have to support preparation of projects so that we can do better origination. We had it from all the panelists, the closeness that the Pdbs have to countries, the granular knowledge that they have to be able to actually develop bankable projects. And for that, it's very clear that we need to make sure that the public development banks have access to project preparation facilities to translate those ideas into bankable projects. We had the need for us, and actually indeed an agreement, that we will support alignment to the Paris Agreement. The need for us to deploy new instruments. We had quite loud and clear about green bonds, expanding green bonds, and also facilitating Africa's access to the Green Climate Fund, which of course sometimes becomes challenging for many countries. It is clear that we need to also support countries to be able to make success of their independent nationally developed contributions, the INDCs that determine contributions, and that we need to ensure that we support them to make a low carbon transition that we all are committed to. Of course, we must realize that Africa faces huge amount of challenges with climate change, and climate adaptation must continue to be at the top of what we do. And we heard quite a lot about the need to expand the share of our financing that's devoted to climate adaptation and to focus on adaptation and resilient investing. Why not forgetting the critical role of biodiversity in all of our investment? We also heard about the fact that we need to leverage more, leverage our resources more, and also make sure that we provide technical assistance to the Pdbs themselves, but to the entire financial ecosystem in Africa that we support. We heard that, yes, in the environment where currency risk, exchange risk becomes a problem, there's need for us to promote greater use of local currency financing to mitigate those currency risks in the foreign exchange risks that we have facing many of the Pdbs. We heard about the importance of strengthening partnerships, and we had so many examples that were given today about how we all work together. In fact, I like what Ambrose Fayolle said of EIB, European Investment Bank, when he said, the financing in common is good if we are together. And of course, we need to work together to reach the potential of Africa. That is the key, maximizing every potential for Africa and unlocking that. Of course, one key part of that potential is the issue of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And we heard about the need to reboot trade finance for private sector, in particular for the small and medium-sized enterprises. We heard as well about our role to support industrialization of Africa, in particular the small and medium-sized enterprises, and to build their capacities. At the end of the day, we also have very clearly that money is king. And we need to support, for example, the risk capital for the public development banks to deepen their ability to respond and to support Africa to grow back very strongly. And so I think it was very, very well put by Thabo about the challenges that the Pdbs face in terms of governments themselves, the liquidity problems that they have, and the difficulty of getting additional resources. So we have to also strengthen the linkages between the public development banks and the larger ones and the smaller ones on the continent, and also make sure that we deepen and strengthen connections between those up to the subnational and also even connecting with the global. As we do all of our work, we need to focus on the recovery process so that that recovery process is inclusive. It also supports the vulnerable population. It allows us to create significant amount of jobs. And we must not, and we should not, forget the microfinance institutions who are very, very critical for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises so that we leave no one behind. As we address these challenges, we need to work better together. As Remy said, let us stand with Africa, with the public development banks working as a coherent system, as I said in the beginning. We need to work better together, and we will. We need to maximize linkages and partnerships, and we will, between local, regional, and global. It is clear that we will be able to achieve Africa's inclusive, green, climate resilient, and health resilient recovery process as we proceed. So as we close and as we look forward, let's collectively be the baobab financing tree to deploy affordable financing all across Africa, while paying attention to strengthening the governance and capacities to deliver, access to more affordable financing, to tackle Africa's debt so that Africa can run faster, better. Let's grow our ambition we had as public development banks for a continent that desperately needs growth and recovery much faster than before. So I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming. And I want to say we are most grateful for your taking the time to share your ideas with us. Merci beaucoup et on se voit à Paris dans une semaine. Merci.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adesina, for giving us that overview and reminding us all for what is at stake here. Thank you all for joining us from wherever it is that you are. And if you do have comments or observations or thoughts that come to you that were sparked by the conversation that you witnessed here today, do remember that you can share it on social media using the hashtag FIC system. But I'll leave you there. Merci beaucoup and bonne journée. Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Georgia. Bravo.
Merci, Georgia.
Thank you.